All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're jumping straight into a paradigm-shifting look at the Third Reich. We're going to deconstruct the mechanics of one of the darkest periods in human history, and we'll be using the exact historical records to show you how a regime of unprecedented cruelty was actually built, managed, and ultimately destroyed. Now, I want you to think about this question. Who really ran the Third Reich? If you're thinking Adolf Hitler, well, you're only partially right. And the full answer? It's actually far more terrifying than what the history books often suggest. Because, as you'll see, the devastation of Europe wasn't just the work of a lone mastermind. It was driven by a willing, highly ambitious network of subordinates. You know, there's this myth that still lingers today. The Nazi propaganda machine sold the German people this image of an infallible, absolute genius who worked day and night for the nation. But the historical reality? Completely different. Hitler was, frankly, a lazy dilettante. He absolutely loathed regular work hours, hovered above reality like a frustrated artist, and was basically incapable of long-term intellectual effort. I mean, he literally couldn't even bring himself to read a file if it was more than 20 pages long. So, to run a country, let alone wage a global war, he had to delegate. Section 1. Assembling the Inner Circle, a web of rivals. Because he refused to do the heavy lifting himself, Hitler spent 15 years meticulously recruiting a sycophantic inner circle to fill the massive void left by his own incompetence. He needed people who brought unique, dark skills to the table. Let's start with Hermann Göring, the addict and opportunist. Now, Göring was a famous World War I flying ace, right? He brought prestige and high society connections to the early Nazi Party, even marrying into wealth to fund Hitler's movement. But behind all those shiny medals, he was a corrupt, morphine-addicted megalomaniac. He hoarded stolen art, collected bizarre titles like Grand Huntsman of the Reich, and created the terrifying secret police, the Gestapo. Yet despite all that bravado, he ultimately failed to rein in Hitler's military impatience. Next up, we have Joseph Goebbels, the vengeful fanatic. Goebbels was a failed writer with a physical disability who actually fabricated a war record just to seem like a hero. Humiliated by his own past failures, he basically avenged himself through radical hatred. As Hitler's propaganda minister, he was incredibly emotionally dependent on his Führer. It was Goebbels who weaponized the media, orchestrated violent boycotts against Jewish businesses, and sold the regime's lies to the public, all while leading a completely scandalous, hypocritical private life of his own. Then there's Heinrich Himmler, the cold bureaucrat. Unlike the street-brawling early Nazis, Himmler was a petty bourgeois with a terrifying, cult-like obsession with the Germanic race. He created the SS, which was this elite, fanatical, black-shirted order that functioned almost like a state within a state. And it was Himmler who methodically engineered the absolute horrors of the final solution. He instituted horrific human breeding programs to multiply Aryan blood, and he built the vast, terrifying machinery of mass extermination. And finally, rounding out the group, Albert Speer, the manipulative technocrat. Speer was a young, distinguished architect who deeply bonded with Hitler over these megalomaniac building projects. He rose to power with just astonishing speed. I mean, he delivered the new Reich Chancery in just 1 year by forcing 8,000 laborers to work day and night. He knew exactly how to manipulate the Führer's artistic fantasies to become his absolute favorite, eventually taking over all wartime armaments. Now, what's really fascinating, and terrifying, honestly, about this quote is how it brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic of the Third Reich. This wasn't some neatly organized, top-down hierarchy. Not at all. It was a toxic system of competition. Hitler actively encouraged overlapping jurisdictions. Göring, Goebbels, Himmler, and Speer were constantly undermining each other. The true, unprecedented horrors of this regime actually emerged from this very friction. You had subordinates fiercely rivaling each other in sheer cruelty, all just to win a pat on the back from a lazy leader. Section 2. The Machinery of Death. Ambition Weaponized. Okay, so we're about to see how this bureaucratic ambition was weaponized with devastating consequences once the war actually exploded. The speed of the German blitzkrieg in 1939 and 1940 was frightening. Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, they all just collapsed in rapid succession. And this dazzling military success allowed Hitler's inner circle to carve up Europe for their own dark purposes. Göring pillaged the great art museums of Paris, while Himmler seized the East to build his twisted colonial empire of slavery and extermination. This brings us to the truly sickening evolution of Himmler's final solution. Initially mobile SS death squads, known as Einsatzgruppen, murdered over 1 million people through mass shootings. But here is a historical reality that will just chill you to the bone. When Himmler visited Minsk in 1941 and witnessed a mass execution, he fainted. He didn't authorize the shift to gas chambers out of any ounce of mercy for the victims. He did it because shooting innocent people face-to-face was causing psychological trauma to his SS executioners. To really understand how ordinary men facilitated this, look at Rudolf Hoess, the commandant of Auschwitz. This really grounds the massive scale of the horror in stark human terms. Hoess lived in a luxurious, stolen villa with his wife and 5 children. His kids rode bicycles in the garden, and he even wrote in his memoirs that it was heaven. Yet this domestic bliss was located a mere 70 meters from the Auschwitz crematorium, just a stone's throw away. He sought career advancement while literal hell burned in his own backyard. So the crucial point we need to take away here boils down to this staggering number, 1,100,000. That is the devastating number of lives systematically extinguished at the Auschwitz-Birkenau complex alone. Himmler specifically chose this site because it was a central railway hub, which allowed for a highly industrial, hyper-efficient killing line to process deportees from every corner of conquered Europe. And within this camp, ambition took on its most grotesque form imaginable through Dr. Joseph Mengele. He exploited the limitless supply of human captives to conduct horrific medical mutilations. Take the harrowing anecdote of 11-year-old twin sisters, Eva and Miriam. They were ripped from their mother on the train platform, spared the gas chamber, but only to be used for Mengele's torturous injections aimed at unlocking the secrets of multiple births to boost the Aryan population. After inducing a severe fever in Eva, Mengele simply looked at her chart and sarcastically laughed that she only had 2 weeks to live. It's just an absolute, total loss of humanity. Section 3. The Empire Collapses. Delusion and Desperation. By late 1941, the tide had turned. Massive, freezing losses on the Russian front totally exposed the systemic flaws of the Nazi war machine. But instead of strategy, the inner circle doubled down on pure delusion and desperation. With Göring disgraced by the failure of the Air Force, Goebbels seized the impending disaster to step back into the spotlight. In 1943, he delivered his infamous Sports Palace speech to a hand-picked, hysterical crowd, screaming, "Do you want total war?" He whipped the German public into a suicidal frenzy. He expanded the draft, eventually pulling in 16-year-old teenagers and 60-year-old seniors to fight the encroaching Allied armies in their everyday clothes. And you have to look at this stark contrast. In his bunker, Hitler was completely detached from reality, moving flags on maps for armies that literally no longer existed. But the hidden reality keeping the war going, that was Albert Speer. To double weapons production despite relentless Allied bombing, Speer built the Dora underground factory. He buried 60,000 concentration camp prisoners in a massive subterranean maze just to build V-2 missiles. 20,000 of those slaves died in the darkness. Also, Speer could look like a miracle worker to Hitler. Which brings us to Section 4, the final reckoning, cowardice and justice.
So, when the end became undeniably imminent, when the walls started closing in, how did these deeply loyal subordinates react? With ultimate cowardice. Let's trace the rapid timeline of 1945. On April 20th, they paraded for the cameras for Hitler's final birthday facade. Just 3 days later, Göring fled to the south and sent a telegram trying to seize power from Hitler. A week after that, Hitler and Goebbels committed suicide in the bunker, with Goebbels going so far as to poison his own 6 children because he couldn't imagine a world without Nazism. By May, Himmler was captured disguised as a common soldier, having secretly tried to negotiate with the Allies behind Hitler's back. They all abandoned their beloved Führer to try and save their own skins. At the historic Nuremberg trials, their true cowardice was completely laid bare. Göring started out combative and proud, trying to justify the whole regime. But his defense completely collapsed the moment the prosecutors forced him to watch raw footage of the concentration camps. Unable to face the hangman's noose, Göring duetted suicide by smuggling in a cyanide capsule, just exactly as Himmler had done upon capture. But take a close look at Albert Speer's strategy. Speer pulled off what's known as the Great Lie. He feigned complete and total ignorance. He looked the judges right in the eye and claimed he knew absolutely nothing about the extermination of the Jews. He successfully manipulated the court to escape the death penalty, serving 20 years in prison,
only to emerge and become a wealthy, best-selling author. It is a profound, truly infuriating injustice, especially when photographic evidence later proved he had visited the Mauthausen death camp while millions perished. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly important thought. How close did the world come to absolute ruin, not because of one lone, infallible, evil genius, but because of a willing network of ambitious, deeply unremarkable subordinates? It's a chilling reminder for all of us, isn't it? Unprecedented evil doesn't just spring from nowhere. It's manufactured by ordinary ambition, toxic bureaucracy, and people willing to look the other way for their own personal gain. Thank you for diving into this explainer with me today. Keep asking the tough questions, keep looking at the structure behind the history, and we'll see you next time.